Welcome in our good friend from the Sacramento Bee and, of course, the mentioned podcast, Candlestick Chronicles, our man, Chris Biderman. Chris, always a pleasure talk. Actually, I want to make sure we talk about a couple of things because Chris has been doing some great work over at the Sacramento Bee, talking high school football as well as Sacramento A's stuff on the way. But let's start with the 49ers. Let's start with Brandon Aiyuk. The big discussion here with Kyle a few minutes ago was, this is a weird place to start, but I feel like Schefter crapped on everybody's parade. What do you think the validity of the Schefter tweet was that Aiyuk essentially signed a deal that has been out there for him for roughly 2.5 weeks?
I think it tracks. With what I've sort of gathered a little bit was that there was a lot of frustration towards Brandon Aiyuk, and he was being a little bit wishy-washy. And I think it was pretty clear in the way Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch addressed the media earlier this week when they talked about it before the deal was signed. Like, those guys were very clearly frustrated, right? Like, Brandon Aiyuk requests a trade. They negotiate a trade with at least 3 teams, right? It sounded like they had trades with Cleveland and New England, and then Brandon Aiyuk simply didn't want to go. And their trade with Pittsburgh, according to Diana Rossini of The Athletic, was contingent on them being able to get Cortland Sutton for a 3rd-round pick that they would be getting from Pittsburgh in that Aiyuk trade, essentially making it a 3-team deal. And then for it to get to this point where, Brandon Aiyuk signs for exactly what Amon-Ra St. Brown signed for, at least on at first blush, on average annual value and all that. It's like, all right, this is kind of where everyone thought we were going to end up, and then we got here, but it took all these crazy twists and turns, and now it's a week before the season starts, and this feels like it could have been happening. This could have happened a long time ago, I think. So that's my takeaway from what Schefter said. It kind of falls in line with that. I know Brandon Aiyuk's agent refuted that. So yeah, I mean, I think this is what happened was the process was just frustrating for everybody on all sides.
You know what I think part of my problem is too, Casey, is it's Schefter. And I feel like Schefter is kind of, whether he has it out for Aiyuk or Aiyuk's agent, but I feel like he has worked pretty hard over the last 5 months to make Brandon Aiyuk look ridiculous in all of this. If it had come from me in Rappaport or is it Mike Garofalo, I might have felt different. Or Matt Barrows or Chris Biderman. I definitely feel different if it came from Chris Biderman. But because it's Schefter, I immediately looked at it sideways.
Yeah, he's a guy that he pulls those type of moves. You know what I mean? Like, we don't forget what the Lamar Jackson situation was and how that went down. For whatever reason, he pulls those type of moves when it comes to these negotiations between teams and star players. I don't know why.
Yeah, I would say he tends to side with the team when it comes to sort of the veiled reporting he does on some of this stuff.
But Chris is the second insider to say this track, so I'm kind of a lone wolf over here. I'll say third because you're an insider too. I say third.
Like I said, I don't know if it's exactly August 10th or August 13th or whatever, but it does feel like it was there for a couple weeks. And like you said, it could be the framework could have been there for that amount of time. Little things here and there needed to be reworked the entire time, and they were going over it or whatever the case may be. You said it doesn't have to be a lie; it could be parts of the truth. You know what I mean? And I think the worst case scenario, that's probably what it was.
Yeah, I mean, the thing was, it was clear. It was clear. Brandon Aiyuk and Amon-Ra St. Brown were going to get similar numbers. Right. And Amon-Ra signed his deal like right around the draft. It was like April 24th. So I think everybody on the outside sort of knew, like, all right, like, and it was reported. It was reported at the time that Brandon Aiyuk is looking for Amon-Ra St. Brown numbers. And that's basically what he got. So I think it's just kind of I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard too much about it because the Niners have been pretty tight-lipped, but my sense is there was a lot of frustration on both sides regarding this whole thing.
So what now? All the tension turned into Trent Williams?
Yeah, basically. I wonder, like, and again, this is just me speculating, but I wonder if the 49ers are saying, all right, Trent, like if we're going to guarantee you 2 or 3 years of this money, can you guarantee us that you're not going to retire at the end of next season? Right. And so, I don't know which side I come down on that in terms of like, I don't know what the exact dollars are, but my assumption would be the Niners are leery of giving Trent Williams a bunch of guaranteed money if they don't think he's going to play out the length, like if he's going to play the amount of time commensurate with that guaranteed money, right? Like if they guarantee him 2 years, they're probably hoping that he plays for 2 years so they don't have this gigantic dead cap number. On the other hand, it's like, man, just pay him. Like this kind of feels like the last ride with this group. Like you just kind of got to pay him, and then if you have to replace him with a draft pick later on, then you do that, and you kick the can down the road when you get to that point. But for me, it's pay Trent Williams now, but I would imagine there's got to be some question about the guaranteed money that the 49ers are wanting to pay him while wondering how long are you going to play? Because if you're only going to play 1 year, why would we guarantee you 2 or 3 years worth of money?
Well, Damien's brought this up a number of different times, and I gotta believe there's something that NFL front office people, the 49ers front office, Parag Marate, and agents and everything. I gotta believe there's something that's there that we're not seeing. But why wouldn't they just do the Aaron Donald deal, where if he plays, we pay you. If you retire, we're not on the hook for nothing. Like it seems very simple if that's what the 49ers concern is. Just structure it just like the Aaron Donald deal.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think that would make a lot of sense. I do wonder too.
Why are we smarter than everybody? I don't understand.
I do wonder if there's a sense like, all right, Trent Williams has been here for what, 2 years now, 3 years, and there have been deep runs in the playoffs in all the seasons Trent Williams has been here. Maybe he just doesn't really want to participate in training camp, and maybe he's just like, yeah, I'll show up a week before the season starts, and then we'll get going. And because you go to the Super Bowl, your season's 5 weeks longer than it normally would be otherwise, and training camp is about 5 or 6 weeks. So, maybe that's the part of the calculus where Trent's like, yeah, like, I could sign this whenever, but I'm just going to take my time because I don't really feel like I need all these practice reps, which to be fair, if you're, 36-year-old Trent Williams with everything he's done in his career and how well he played last year, like, I think that's a reasonable take to have.
What do you feel about this team overall? I mean, we've heard Kenny's talked about the vibes feeling a little off. A phrase we focused on a lot this week came from Manti Te'o, and it was emotionally drained. How real do you think that stuff is? You're kind of chuckling at that. Do you disagree with the sentiment? Now, we did agree the execution of the way he laid that out might have been a little clunky, but in the end, I thought there was a point to the emotionally drained line.
No, for sure. I just laugh at Manti Te'o talking about emotions and being able to read situations accurately.
Poor guy.
But
That's
Poor guy.
that's why I was laughing. Look, I don't mean to take shots. And I don't necessarily disagree with them. It's really hard. Like you talk to all these guys, like, climbing up the mountain, getting there, and then not winning is emotionally draining, right? But on the other hand, it's like, well, regardless of what happened last year, they were going to show up to training camp. They're going to play football this year anyway. So I see kind of both sides of it. I think they're going to have to win a different way this year. And like you're going into the season, like kind of banged up, right? Like we don't know what kind of shape Brandon Aiyuk's in. There was a back and neck injury. So if he's not 100% or if he's not as productive as we're used to him seeing, then, is Ricky Pearsall going to be able to produce at all? Is he even going to play week 1 dealing with his shoulder issues and the fact that he hasn't played any preseason games and hardly got on the practice field this summer? Do you feel comfortable with Jacob Cowing being your number 3 receiver? Just a lot of question marks at that point. You feel good about Deebo Samuel, and maybe you feel good about Brandon Aiyuk, but you still have question marks. You have Juwan Jennings dealing with an oblique injury, right? Along the defensive line, that's typically been the team's strength. You have Nick Bosa, and then you don't really know if you're going to be dominant at the other 3 spots, right? Like you feel okay about Leonard Floyd, but you don't really know given how much he's played. And at this stage in his career, he's clearly on the back 9 of his career, right? The one thing I do feel pretty good about going into this season is the secondary. I think the Niners secondary has a chance to be really good. And I think this is going to be the first year since Kyle Shanahan came on that the secondary is going to be better than the pass rush. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because we've seen teams win both ways, right? We're just used to the Niners winning with the pass rush. But with Diamador Lenore in a contract year, with Travarius Ward in a contract year, I think Jair Brown is ready to take a significant step. We'll see about Talanoa Hufanga, but I don't think there's going to be a huge drop off if he's not playing between Talanoa Hufanga and even George Odom or even Malik Mustafa, right? Like I think they can make that strong safety position fit until Hufanga is back or he's back to 100%. And I think Renardo Green is showing signs as a rookie that he might be a useful player, maybe more useful than any other corner in their rookie season than they've had recently. And then you have Isaac Yiadom, who had a really good camp before his ankle injury. So I just think the secondary is going to be really good. I do have questions about the health of the receiving core, given Pearsall's injuries, given Juwan Jennings' injuries, given that you might be, asking Jacob Cowling to be your third receiver to start the season. But like that's a long-winded way of saying I think that it's going to be a different team. They're more top-heavy this year, and I don't know that the depth is going to be there, so they're going to have to rely on their stars. And I think a big question has been, well, if two of your stars, Brandon Aiyuk and Trent Williams, got no training camp, what's that going to look like early in the season? I think that's a fair question to ask.
I wanted to ask Kyle this, but I'll ask you, Chris. It's just as good. Candlestick Chronicles. Either way, it don't matter. And ask you, Dan, about this. I talk about the vibes and vibes being off and all this other stuff. And I don't think this was anybody's plan. I don't think this was orchestrated in any way. This this is not an evil genius type situation. But through everything that happened, Brandon Aiyuk, I can only speak for myself and maybe for other 49ers fans, and I wonder about the locker room. Getting the Brandon Aiyuk the deal done yesterday gave a little bit of energy to this team for me. I thought about
Yeah.
how I felt about them after they lost the Super Bowl, and I was like, I mean, there's nothing they can do that's going to get me energized for the regular season. And you get closer to the season, and it's like, all right, maybe so, but like none of it matters. Like they start 6-0, like it don't matter. We've got to win a Super Bowl. And it was a little malaise or whatever. And he signs yesterday. And first it was like, all right, finally got it done. And then it was like, all right, let's go. Like let's go. All right, the boys here. Let's get work. And I wonder, Chris, if that may happen in that locker room. They were all kind of in a malaise, the Super Bowl hangover, whatever the case may be. They had this crazy situation with Brandon Aiyuk. They still got one with Trent Williams, but they get one of their guys back, and there may be a sense of, all right, the boys back. Let's get to work. We get one more, and now we really gonna get to work. You think that's possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely think that's possible. And, the other thing I didn't really hit on, Debo Samuel, I mean, I went to one training camp practice, but Debo Samuel had probably the best camp of anybody on offense, right? And if you think about, Debo Samuel has been good. He hasn't been as good as he was in 2021. You think about combining, all pro Brandon Aiyuk with 2021 version of Debo Samuel, who is essentially in a contract year, right? Like Debo Samuel is more or less in a contract year this season for the 49ers. That combination could give the 49ers the best wide receiver duo in the league, right? And then that's even before thinking about Christian McCaffrey. So obviously there's still plenty of reasons to be super optimistic about where the 49ers are because you do have Debo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey, I don't know what his status is. I would expect him to play, if not Monday night, maybe early on in the season coming off the calf injury. And I just think like if you expect Brock Purdy to take another leap, Brock Purdy in his first full season as a starter was an MVP candidate, right? Like for the first 15, 16 weeks of the season. If he takes another leap and continues to get better and build on the confidence that it seemed like he got during the playoffs when he's leading those comeback wins and making plays with his legs in the fourth quarter of those games and, leading a potentially game-winning drive in overtime of the Super Bowl, right? Like there's there's plenty of reason to be optimistic about this team. So I think sometimes we can get caught up in the quarterback stuff. It happened last year, right? Like all we're doing is talking about Trey Lance and what's going to happen with him. And it's like, oh, Brock Purdy's a starter. His elbow's fine. And they're going to go hang 30 on the Steelers in week 1 and just dominate them. And then it's like, oh yeah, they're the best team in the NFC quite clearly. Right. The chatter doesn't always line up with what happens on the field. And I think that's been true about these 49ers, given all the quarterback drama they've had and all the outside discussion and all the criticism that there's been about how they've handled the quarterback situation with Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo and all of that stuff. They've still won a ton of games. They've still made deep runs in the playoffs every year since all that's been happening. So yeah, I think this team can be immune from outside chatter to a certain extent. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if they came out and played really well early in the season, despite all this, Brandon Aiyuk and Trent Williams chatter coming out of training camp.
Feels like that's a strong characteristic of Kyle Shanahan too. He's able to block that out. I mean, he's been under the microscope both positively and negatively since his coaching career started because of his father. Yeah. And I think the character traits that Chris Biderman just laid out for this football team apply to Kyle Shanahan as well, who is one of the best in the game at what he does.
Yeah, unquestionably. And like when people criticize Kyle Shanahan, like I get it, right? If the standard is like winning the Super Bowl or failure, like if that's your viewpoint, I get where you might be coming from in your criticism. But like it took Andy Reid 19, 20, 21 years as a head coach in the league before he won a Super Bowl. And then now he's like people are talking about him as like the second or third best coach of all time. Right? It's just we're so often prisoners of the moment. We so often neglect to consider context in terms of, what it like 30 other teams would take the Niners problems, right? 30 other teams feel like they would be upgrading at head coach if they had Kyle Shanahan. So the Niners do deal with a lot of first world problems. Like, oh, they have too many good players to pay. Like the Carolina Panthers would kill for that issue, right? So we get wrapped up in all this negativity because they haven't won a Super Bowl. And I get the angst of it given, what the 80s and what the 90s were. But in the big picture, like Kyle Shanahan's doing just fine. The Niners overall are doing just fine. And if your standard is Super Bowl or bust, I get why you might be frustrated, but it's there's only one Super Bowl winner every year. And generally that goes to the team with the best quarterback. And right now, Patrick Mahomes is in the league, and that's just kind of what it is.
Another thing. Sorry, Dave. Another thing that I heard this morning. I was listening to Baldy. He was on with the morning roast, and I know this is going to come off pro team, all this other stuff. All right, man, but hear me out, man, because I do have to give a shout out to the 49ers, John Lynch, Parag Marathe, even Kyle Shanahan, because they have kept this team together somehow, some way for a long time now. We're going on like 4th or 5th year of generally the same group. And that's probably going to be another year or two, the way the contracts are of this. So you're talking about 6, 7 years. Like name another team that's doing that. I don't know how the Niners are doing that. Well, part of it is Brock Purdy in his contract. I don't know how they're doing it, but look at all the people that they developed and they were able to retain. We're talking Bosa. We're talking Trent Williams was in a trade, but they had to sign him first time. Aiyuk, Debo, Kittle, Fred Warner. Hell, look at the Chiefs. And they won. It was able to work out for them. The Chiefs had to get rid of Tyreek Hill. They said, bro, we can't do it. Mm-hmm. We got to get rid of Tyreek Hill. They had to get rid of Tyreek Hill. You know what I mean? Look at these other franchises who are super talented, but they, for whatever reason, I don't know. Hell, Bilo and JC in Seattle are probably like, the 49ers don't deal with a salary cap or something like, because how do they keep all these guys on all of these contracts? And that's a testament to those guys, number one, finding those players and then being able to retain them.
It's kind of crazy to me because the Jim Harbaugh years get talked about with so much affinity, and like rightfully so. That was a great team, and it went from 6-10 to Super Bowl contender in one season. But that run was 3 years. We're at like a 6-year run with Kyle Shanahan. and the 49ers being Super Bowl contenders. So I think in the moment, people do tend to focus on some of the bad stuff, but like to your point, and I think I've said it to you guys before, but like, Tom Brady and the Patriots played like four different versions of winning football, right? It was when Tom Brady first got there, it was okay, he's kind of a game manager, he's being carried by the defense. And then by the end, it was Tom Brady's carrying everything, right? And in between, there were a bunch of different iterations, and they were running the ball with Corey Dillon at one point, and then, like doing, and then hucking it to Randy Moss, like just playing different styles of football, and it was all sustainable because of the quarterback play. And to me, like that's why Brock Purdy is so important. Obviously, he's a quarterback, but like his development and him continuing to get better is really going to be what gives this team long-term staying power, like long-term beyond just what's been happening these 6 years. Because if Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy can continue to field, one of the three best offenses in football, and then the 49ers are just going to be right there. And they're going to, that is going to be the thing that elevates them year in and year out, sort of regardless of what the roster looks like. And yeah, they're going to have to draft good players, no doubt. Like Trent Williams isn't going to be there forever. Who knows if Deebo Samuel's going to be there beyond this season, right? George Kittle isn't going to play forever. But with Brock Purdy, with Brandon Aiyuk, with Nick Bosa, with Fred Warner, all here for the foreseeable future, the Niners are gonna have a chance, and particularly with Kyle Shanahan pulling the strings. So I think that's really the key for the season to me, is like, does Brock Purdy take that next step? Because if he does, then you feel great about the 49ers future.
Chris, before we lose you for today, you've been doing some great work on a variety of subjects over at the Sacramento Bee. Recently, you covered, I think within the last week or so, you wrote about the A's and the season tickets and how quickly they sold. What is that? Like, what are we in for when the A's take over that ballpark and we have a second major sports franchise here for the first time in a different sport?
I think it's going to be exciting to start, right? It sounds like there's going to be a lot of interest in Major League Baseball just as a whole. I don't know if there's going to be like what I'm curious to see is like how excited are people about the A's versus how excited are people going to be about just having a major league team in town where they can, go see the Cubs opening night or go see the Yankees or whatever. That's what I'm interested to see. I'm interested to see how good the A's are when they play here, because look, if the A's came here and they played really well, there's no doubt in my mind that Sacramento would come out and support them. But if the A's, and the A's have shown signs through the second half of this baseball season that like maybe they're an up and coming team that might be kind of fun to watch. We'll see. But if they're the A's of the previous few seasons that's losing, 100 plus games a year, I wonder what the appetite's going to be for people to go see the A's on a 100-degree Tuesday in July play, the Brewers or somebody, right? Like I'm genuinely curious to see that. But it's really, I mean, I just can't get over how unprecedented this is. Like there's no like precedent. There's no recent history or any history really of a team going to play in a minor league ballpark that's actually drawing fans, right? Like you had the Blue Jays playing in Buffalo or wherever it was during the pandemic, but it wasn't like there were no fans there. They were just playing baseball games. This is like they're creating a fan product. So I'm fascinated to see what that looks like. There's no doubt in my mind that Sacramento is a great sports town and people will show out for it, and that's been reflected in the ticket sales. But what I'm curious to see is a staying power. Like, what does it look like in year 3 if the A's stink? Right? If the A's are losing 100 games a year and it's year 3, like does, how much of that interest continues beyond just, people coming to see the Dodgers and the Red Sox and the Yankees and the Cubs and the big draws and the Giants, right? So that's a big question I have, but I do think the A's will feel a little bit of pressure to spend a little bit of money to try to make this a better product, because they are trying to build a little bit of momentum going into Vegas. And frankly, I don't know how much momentum they have like in Las Vegas right now. I don't know how excited people are. So I think the A's may or may not use this opportunity in Sacramento to try to curry a little bit of favor. And if they can build an exciting product in Sacramento, then they might feel a little bit better about being able to build an exciting product in Las Vegas.
Man, great stuff, Chris. Great stuff at the B and great stuff covering the San Francisco 49ers, man. We truly appreciate you. Thank you, my friend. We're excited for games to get started and to have some things to talk about in the coming weeks.
Actual football, man. I'm
man.
dying to talk about actual football instead of these contracts. It's gonna be great.
Almost there, buddy. Almost there. Appreciate you, Chris.
Good to
Thank
see
you,
you,
brother.
man. Yeah.
That's our man, Chris Biderman. Again, make